Ready? Okay, I'll click. There we go. All right. Well, welcome everybody. This is our first webinar of the season for the Center for Deep Green Faith. As you may know, we changed our name, but the cast of characters is the same. The activities are the same. And so hopefully it will be pretty seamless. And wanted to let you know about how we're going to proceed tonight. We have a pretty manageable group. So when we have, Jerry was actually going to be giving us a fair amount of opportunity for discussion and questions tonight. So if you want to ask a question, just go down there to your reactions down there at the bottom, probably at the bottom of your screen. And there's a little option there to raise your hand. And then we will call on you, and you can then comment, ask questions, or whatever. We do want this to be a back and a forth. There's plenty of good material here to talk about. So that's the way we're going to proceed tonight. I want to let you know about two upcoming events. We have on September 15th, we're going to be having a webinar on ecological grief, naming and healing, which should be really interesting. And I'm looking forward to Caroline. She was I had her in class at one point. She's gone on to be a park ranger. I think she's got her master's at Swanee in religion and environment. She's going to be an interesting person to share her thoughts. So keep that in mind for September the 15th. Next week, hopefully, or very soon, we'll be sharing information about our year-long certificate program, as well as Jerry's course, which is coming up. We'll be having courses this fall. Jerry's will be first off. So we'll give you information about that. And then our YouTube channel, we hope to have up soon. And we'll let you know about that. As we go through this transition, you're going to be getting a fair number of emails from us. We apologize for that. It's taking us a while to kind of get all our infrastructure back in place. So we want you to be aware of when things are open and available to you. So just be looking and bear with us. And then we promise we won't fill your mailbox quite as much down the road here. So I think that's most of what I have to share. We'll be hearing from Jerry tonight on deeper green faith, including creation in word and deed. He has some very interesting thoughts to share with us, and I'm looking forward to them. And please do jump in and share your thoughts, your comments. This is really intended to be a back and a forth tonight. So with that, I think I'll turn it over to Jerry.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we have a small enough group, I think, for conversation, but too large of a group for storytelling. So does that make sense to you all? So I invite your responses and your responsiveness, but please refrain from stories. Might make this go well that way. All right, so I'm going to you share a screen. That screen's gonna have Robin's face on it, or maybe not. Okay, and then I need to make that. All right, is everybody seeing Deep Green Church Living the Whole Gospel? Are you seeing that slide? Because I now can't see you. So Robin and Elizabeth and Mary, you guys are going to have to be my eyes on the group because I can't see them from the way when I'm sharing this screen and sharing this PowerPoint. So, all right. So, are you guys seeing this screen that says Black Lives Matter? How has the racial conversation changed?
Yes.
All right, very good. So we're good. So here's where I want us to start, and this is a conversation starter from the get-go. So again, since I can't see you guys, you may be raising your hands. So the rest, Robin and company, you guys are going to have to help to monitor basically, folks. So here's a question I want us to ponder for a minute. And that is this. What is new, you think, about the conversation about race over the last several years? Since the Black Lives Matter movement has arisen, um, if you were to, take a word or two to say, what's the change in the conversation, or what's new, at least, in the popular imagination um, in conversation about race, what would you say? How would you name something new or different?
Jerry, you just want us to answer up?
Yeah, I guess so, sure.
I'll just give it a shot. In the racial reconciliation meetings and work and books that I've seen lately, what's changed is that for me, from my input or perspective, is that it's brought us way back into the history of it and into extreme truth telling and how it all started, way back when on the European continent, then moved into slavery and so forth and so on. So it's a lot more open and it's a lot more truth telling.
Yeah.
That's all I could add to that.
Thank you. I think that's kind of right. And it begs the question, what kind of truth is being told that wasn't being told before? I see Gail, I see Janet say many more people are aware. So it has, and that's what I think that's right, that there has been something that has entered the popular consciousness that was just not there. And Gail says awareness and openness about the truth, and that begs that same question: what truth? What truth is being talked about that was not talked about before? And I'll just lend, unless there's hearing the story of the marginalized in their words. Hey, that's pretty good. I'm going to keep that. Since marginalization is a word I'm going to be throwing around tonight. Laura, thank you for that. And I can see the chat, by the way, so that does work really well for you guys. You can chime in and chat, and I can see that. Is there any other folks just dying to speak, or I'm about to go on and give you my answer? Resistance to wokeness, and more negative pushback, but and so that's right. It's going in two directions. As one who really was, I think, wise would predict. And then we have a lot more awareness. So thank you for April. Thank you for picking my word. White privilege. So I think there are two, and that goes with Elizabeth, the systemicness of it, right? I think there are two words that have been introduced to the public lexicon that I'm sure have been around a long time, but were not in public awareness, and that is white privilege and white fragility. And I want to say that those things, which are extraordinarily hard for white people to talk about, is indeed getting more to the roots of the matter, which is where I think some of you guys, where you're saying truth, I think that's what you meant, the truth, the roots of the matter, and perhaps the causes and not just the symptoms, the underlying fear that drives all of this, the unconscious assumptions of privilege and right, and it is creating painful backlash. It's exactly right. And of course it is, because it's both true and painful. So here's the whole proposition of the evening, is to say that deep green, with this thing we call deep green, and deep green's sort of a catchphrase for a lot of things, as you would guess from the fact that we chose that as a title for our organization, that we will need the same level and kind of change in the direction of conversation about creation. That we need to get to that truthiness. We need to get to the systemicness. We need to get to these difficult unconscious things that actually drive our behavior that's destroying the planet. And I guess I want to say that I think it will be every bit as difficult as racism, as gender has been, as sexual orientation is still, as these things. If the conversation is not that difficult, you're probably not having the conversation. Would be kind of my take on this. So we have had for decades, we've called upon good folks to care about poor folks, as though acts of charity and advocacy is really the solution, while the rest of us white folk basically can live our lives unchallenged. That's kind of what's changing. The assumptions of being in the majority and the fundamental assumptions about ourselves and our place in the world, we kind of keep those intact, and we go out and we try to be good people. I think that's a fair description of where we are in creation care as well. That we pretty much are trying to energize and activate around what you would call technical solutions without getting systemic problems. We've been on this journey a long time. I think we need to move the conversation, the things we are learning about race and gender, and these other conflicts, onto also conversations about the web of life. It cannot be done in sequence. We can't wait to finish one before we move on to the other. But the root causes are the same, so it really would be a false dichotomy to say one is different than the other. They're all the same. The fear of the other, a defense of a status quo of privilege, the struggle is of the same kind, and so the paths to healing are the same. Truth-telling, proclamation, practice, and genuine repair. And so the invitation to conversation tonight is really about getting this more into the center and not on the fringes of our language, and our storytelling and our habits. Not as simply an option for some, the tree huggers, but as a central work of the whole, because it's a problem of the whole. Okay. So I want to introduce two terms in the spirit of this, and one of them is this one. Creation marginalization. The absence of creation from theology, liturgy, hymnody, imagery, preaching, architecture. You can add to that list. But that's simply the perpetuated, unconscious, and sometimes conscious invisibility and silence and irrelevance of the rest of the created order outside of immediate and false human interests. And I use the word false because it's an illusion to think that we can actually deal in human good while neglecting creation's good. It just doesn't work. And so this is not only for those interested in special interests, and this is not a problem only for the special interests and the profiteers from extraction and exploitation. We all partake in an economy based on exploitation. We are all part of this. It has more to do, it's not so much about the climate deniers out there or the politicians who are making hay out of, stirring up resistance and anger. It really has more to do with our capacity to simply shrug. A silent complicity, a business as usual routine, assumptions of status quo that indeed allow the status quo. So the other side of this coin of marginalization is this one, creation inclusion. And so inclusion is more than advocacy. just as social justice is more than charity and more than helping. It involves the awakening work of recognizing marginalization in the first place. This is similar to the Black Lives Matter thing. What has come to our attention a lot is just how marginalized this society has been toward in terms of race. And so it's letting creation into the house. It's sharing and letting it move in with us. It's not just relationships of stewardship and service, but of family and kinship. So the advocacy for me is to say, I want to advocate for letting the rest of creation into our household of faith. Not as a replacement for action, because that would be also false, but as a foundation for it, which I want to say is largely missing. So what it does, and so what it is, this inclusion then needs to become giving voice, granting presence, nurturing welcome to the rest of the web of life into our lives and our community lives and our worship lives and our spiritual lives and all of that together. So what that does is it creates a new additional focus, a focus that's not just out there looking for evildoers in business and society and Congress. It's meeting the enemy and finding that it is also us, and going down that road. So, being inclusive includes then the household of faith. Now I'm looking at a little chat here because I haven't been keeping up with that. Racism, systemic problem perpetuated by existing systems. Same conversation, exactly. And the fact that everyone here is in the white majority doesn't change this conversation any. The learning is the same. And I don't know, but that yes, I need. And part of the reason this is good for us to have this conversation together is to help us work this out. So, all right, so let me keep moving here. Being inclusive includes the household of faith. How can we more deeply engage our inclusion? We mostly have heard messages that say the church or Christians are to get out there and speak up and stand up for environmental issues. That's normally how it's framed, and that's not wrong. That's actually, quite right. But what it tends to do is then it makes us green folk tend to recruit toward actions on issues outside ourselves. And in many ways, I really think, especially clergy, they're more afraid of the church house than they are of the White House. And they're more willing to cross politicians and business and even law enforcement than they are to cross their own communities of faith. So what we seldom hear are messages calling the church to fundamental repentance and change, not just in actions, but also in their beloved traditions. A call to deep self-reflection upon our own way of being as a community of which we have come to love. And that's a part of the problem. We're kind of behind the racial engendered conversation, I think, as it is now emerging. So, sorry about that. I still got an endless, never-ending hack. All right. So that means that these double circles on the left here on the screen is what I think is kind of where we are. We have a faith that is actually not part of the world, or not part of the green world anyway. It's silent. It marginalizes. It's not very welcoming. But we do have a missional mindset that says we need to get some folks out there into the world. And so you see this slight overlap where we are trying to engage the world, but we're not really talking about the faith community. What we need is a deep green church that's living in the world. And so that the faith community and creation itself are, there's just not so much difference between the two. It's just natural. So the way to get at this is this kind of relationship of these three things I'm proposing. Not necessarily, not actually sequential at all. It's back and forth and in and out, and it's not a program actually either. But there are a couple of particulars that matter here. As we could move between and from, faith that becomes deeper green, the actual faith, and then this deep green faith practice becomes creation inclusive, and creation inclusion then grows to be just natural and normal and not specialized. And as it grows to be natural and normal and not specialized, creation is more welcome. And as creation becomes more welcome, faith becomes deeper green. It goes all ways. But the faith is an included target of change, not just issues of climate and toxins and pollutions and extinctions and habitat loss. That the church is not simply the doer of change or the maker of change, it's also a target of change. It is also a problem to be solved, as are the pollutions in the world. And and that kind of change in a faith community requires a full panoply of inclusion that engages the full faith practice. What is said, what is sung, what's choreographed, what's decorated, what's built, what's practiced, and so that's where the deep green faith becomes creation inclusive, when it becomes all encompassing. And then natural and normal means that such inclusion is not creation centric. We're not trying to become creation centric. We're not swapping God for nature or Jesus for trees. Inclusion becomes full when it becomes normal and routine, not special and periodic. That's the problem with even the season of creation, which is good and necessary in its own right, but it's not the end game. We're getting somewhere when we no longer need a season of creation. In fact, it should make no sense, because everything is a season of creation, kind of. But anyway, when creation becomes family and not guests, when it lives with us and not just visits, it's not about the celebration of nature. It's about the welcome of nature's rightful place in what's actually the celebration of God in Christ, redeeming the world. Expanding our size of our tent. I think that kind of works. As the work that just needs to be done. So faith becoming deep green. So we mean the whole faith and not just specialized parts of it, like particular responses to urgent circumstances or like climate change. And it's also, I think, to say the reason our faith needs renewed is not because we're in an environmental crisis. It needs renewed because it needs renewed. That it too has been shrunk and crippled and hampered all along by its exclusion and marginalization of the rest of the web of life. It needs healing whether there's a environmental crisis or not, and because relationship with God is hampered without the inclusion of God's whole heart, which is God's whole creation. So we don't just need to save creation. We need creation. We always have. We are, in fact, creation, and we're not saving something outside ourselves. We're among the ones being saved, I guess. And that's where faith becomes the target. And so then, I'm just going to very quickly run this one. The work then involves all of these things. The vision of the community itself, that we nurture a green hope, the word of proclamation, that we actually have green good news, that we actually are good news to all creation, and we say it, and we sing it, and we pronounce it, we proclaim it. And that our liturgy, which is another form of proclamation, is also carries that very word in in our movement, in our what's the word I'm looking for? Our collected and repeated phrases that are the expressions of the church and liturgy. In attunement to prayer, green spirituality, in a hospitality that is not discordant from the gospel that we're trying to preach, but that our life of the community is consistent with the proclamation, and our call for justice, of course, green righteousness, which is what we do better than the others, and it certainly is big and critical. So it's not a competition. Proclaiming the gospel in word, dance, and living. So it doesn't mean that ecology is the tail of the dog that wags the dog, which is our life of faith. It doesn't mean that being green lies at the center or takes top priority and everything else is organized around it, any more than does racial justice, human sexuality, issues of gender inequality lie at the center and everything else must fit modern concerns. It's more like it's just a permeating part, and it becomes natural and normal. Our hope is green because an ungreen hope is incomplete and diminished. Our prayer is green because it enlivens and deepens prayer. Our hospitality is green because not to do so is an illusion and a crippling separation. It's not green first, it's green normal. Not because green is a cause, but because green is simply true, it's reality. Anthropocentric faith is false and it is fatal. It's a fatal illusion that is now beginning to catch up with this. Yes, integral ecology is a word that expresses this and tries to get at this. So that's exactly right. So if someone should ask you, what is the scope of creation care in a community of faith? I'd say it's all of this. Worship and sacrament, teaching and preaching, hospitality and fellowship, children and youth, spiritual practice, peace and justice. If it's not all these things, then it is truncated. Now, so I'm going to move from here to simply run some illustrations of this marginalization. The absence, the silence of creation and I'm going to use Episcopal examples. So I'm pretty sure not all of you are Episcopalians, but you have your own versions of these. In your own faith tradition, I'm pretty confident. Here's our Catechism of Hope from the Book of Common Prayer. So we have several pages of catechism in the Book of Common Prayer. They're pretty good. This one is pretty good in its first two questions. It asks, what's the Christian hope? And the answer is to live with confidence and newness and fullness of life, and to await the coming of Christ in glory and the completion of God's purpose for the world. Not a bad answer. What do we mean by the coming of Christ in glory? Another good answer. By the coming of Christ in glory, we mean that Christ will come not in weakness but in power and will make all things new. But then what happens with this third one? What do we mean by everlasting life? By everlasting life, we mean a new existence, in which we are united with all the people of God, in the joy of fully knowing and loving God and each other. And I have to ask the question, what shifted here? If the coming in Christ in glory is to make all things new, if the hope is the completion of God's purpose for the whole world, how is it that everlasting life becomes simply about all the people of God? And so this is just one of those illustrations of, for one, the faith actually is very creation inclusive. These first two answers are very creation inclusive, and then we get to that third one, and it's kind of like, what happened? So we need to revisit our faith, and to awaken wokeness, awaken to that marginalization of creation. We need to end it in our faith life. Here's another example from the Catechism. What's the mission of the church? The mission of the church is to restore all people to unity with God and each other in Christ. It's going, really? My Bible reads that the mission of the church is to enjoin God's reconciliation of all things in Christ. But the second answer is good. The church pursues its mission as it prays and worships, proclaims the gospel, promotes justice, peace, and love. Another one from the Book of Common Prayer. These are the prayers of the people that are repeated verbatim all across the land in many, many churches. But look at the language that it uses when it comes to expressions about the earth. The good earth which God has given us. Reverence for the earth, that we may use its resources rightly. For blessing upon all human labor. There's a lot of animal labor out there, by the way. And for the right use of the riches of creation, for the just and proper use of creation. So these are not wrong, but why the truncation? It's not really even a biblical worldview. God has not given us the earth. God has given the earth into our hands. That's not the same thing. The riches of creation, well, I guess so, but creation is not valued simply for its richness. So just to become aware of this, and there are ways to fix these kind of things. We have within the rubrics, actually, you can simply change them. For the good earth that God has given into our care. A reverence for the earth as your own creation, that we may work for the health and wholeness and justice for all living things. A right relationship with all creation. A just and proper care for all creation. Baptismal covenant. Will you seek and serve Christ in all persons, loving your neighbor as yourself? That's a great question. And will you strive for justice and peace among all people and respect the dignity of every human being? I will. But why stop there? Why not seek and serve Christ in all persons and living things? Why not respect the dignity of every living thing? As actually, I think, is the biblical picture of Adam and Eve in the garden, of the prophets calling Israel to righteousness in the land, and so on. Let's see. Still just kind of run through these. A mission statement. This is a real one. There even use the word inclusive. Inclusive, welcoming, and supportive house of worship. A community that ministers to and with children and youth. Church doors are open to all our neighbors. There's a good question. I saw the word neighbor up there from Joey. Jesus says to love your neighbor as yourself, which says, who is your neighbor? And this statement begs that question, which reaches out to serve Christ in all persons. Well, why not all persons and other living things of God's creation that has been given into our hands, and are under the same grace that we are, and under the same work of God of reconciliation and restoration? It's just missing, which is my point. It's just missing. It's silent. A community that advocates for justice and peace for all and respects the dignity and worth of every individual. I'm assuming read people. A church which celebrates creation and shows reverence for the beauty that God has given to us. I see nowhere in the Bible that God has given the beauty of creation to us. It's beautiful in its own right. It is not a possession of ours. Anyway, those kind of things are just illustrations. The architecture then is another one. These are two windows in a church in Cincinnati. This one on the left is a creation window. It's down in a basement. in a hallway. And of course, the salvation window on the right is, prominently displayed in the worship space. I don't begrudge that. I do wonder, though, what happened to all of the created things in the first one, in the second one? Is there not an inclusion of all of that in the salvation story? Did the story change somehow between that first window and the second window? And in our religious imaginations, yes, we changed the story. The biblical storyline, not so much. The biblical redemptive storyline would include all of the elements of creation in that salvation window. So shouldn't creation and salvation windows look more similar? I guess is my point. And what if Christians everywhere recognize that first window as a salvation window? Because that's the restoration of all things. That's the rehealing of, that's heaven coming down to earth as in Revelation. It's that first window that actually captures both, I would argue, both Old and New Testament expressions of what the end game of God is. And if that were true, how would that change our ethics and our music and our motivations and the words that we use? Yep. So this last one then is inclusion becomes normal. It's all green because the gospel's green. And normal means not specialized, I guess, is what I want to say. And so that means that normalcy of the presence of a welcome of creation permeates everything. It just becomes natural as breathing, which sounds pretty naturally natural. So that means we pay our attention to welcome and inclusion, and our worship, our proclamation, and so on. I've kind of gone over that. It just is that it permeates all of our space and all of our behaviors, all of our eating together, our singing together, our words together, our liturgies together. All right. So, I wanted to get that out there to you, and then to open up and save us some time, I guess, to have conversation. So, is there questions that have shown up, or questions that you have, or challenges, or you don't get it? Any of that stuff is open season for this. What do you think of the parallel? Oh, good. There's Robin.
I was just wondering, Jerry, how this relates to the sacramental tradition that many of our churches are part of, or a sacramental way of understanding their faith.
Well, that begs a question, I guess, Robin, about what you mean by sacramental. I can think of two big categories. One is sacrificial atonement, which is the whole idea that Christ is somehow did something in place of us, right? And our celebration of that, right? And our needing Christ is that go between. The other one that's sacramental is that sacrament is embodied grace. And so when we say sacramental, we mean things, physical things, and motions, and actions, and stuff are sacrament, meaning they're full of the presence of God. That just the fact of them doing, it's more than words. So those two I come to mind. So I'm not sure which one you're thinking about when you ask.
I mean, I mean the latter, in the sense that if you're in a Eucharistic tradition, we say that you have the bread and the wine on the altar, but we see within it the body and blood of Christ, as opposed to just bread and wine. It's more than a meal. So that
Yes.
sense that there's something under the surface, and that's, if you don't have a sacramental tradition, then it's just it's a love feast, but it's not the presence, the real presence of Christ on the altar.
Yeah, and I would say that most sociologists of religion would say all religions are sacramental. It's just some are more formally so. And so even your pretty low church folks actually are very ritualized. And so yeah, their practices together are full of sacrament. It's just not called that. So the idea, though, that things are holy, that God permeates, I think is very much in tune with this. It's the recognition and naming of all things as there's that naming, naming of things as holy, and ending the dichotomy of the profane versus the sacred. And blending that more, I guess. Does that make any sense?
Thank you. I see that Michael has his hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Sometimes I do wonder if it is, I don't know, the doctrine or the interpretation we give to the Bible, especially the creation story, when we give human all the power to dominate, to enjoy everything, and so it's like God has given this everything to human. There always depends on humans, whatever free will to use it. We don't talk much about how to live in harmony with other creation. But it's like you have given a plate of a meal, you need to eat it. So it's very little you can hear in the proclamation, in the service, almost in the doctrine itself. We don't hear much about human. We are part of the creation. It's like we have given whatever God created to us, for us to, because when I read this story in the Old Testament, humans were given the responsibility to take care of creation, not to overuse, not to dominate, just to live in harmony. But I don't know, it's the doctrine, but also I was thinking people who are creating, those are making lectionaries. Maybe I should put some lessons about, or some readings about creation, which maybe the preachers or those who prepare service may tap into it to make, I don't know, Sunday's preaching, or the Sunday school classes. They should have something in creation, because it seems it's not the agenda of the church taking up the creation, it's the agenda of the other organizations, the activists. So that has become so painful to me. I really wanted the Christians, believers of God, to be the agent of taking care of creation.
I agree. Thank you, sir. Thanks for preaching my sermon. Exactly right. Gail,
I
let's
believe
see.
Gail has a question.
Well, a comment. I actually agree with Reverend Michael on what he was saying, and I may have misunderstood you earlier, Jerry, when you said that God didn't give us creation. I may have misunderstood, because I have a dog that wants to go outside, I think. But I mean, what he was just saying about in Genesis, God gave us dominion over all of creation. We've corrupted that word. A lot of people think dominion means, that you rule over and control, but it comes from dominus, from God. We're in part of God's creation ourselves, created in his image, and he has endowed us with this very great gift of grace and dominion that
Yes.
we corrupt.
Here's the expression of the heresy as I now come to name it. And you'll see it in the words I've already actually some of those prayers of the people and stuff. The sort of the way people come to think of it is actually that God created creation in order to bless humankind. That the purpose of creation is humankind. But that is not the biblical story. Humankind was created on the sixth day. We shared that day with animals. It wasn't even a big hoopla about us. Creation is valid in its own right and given into our care for us to, the word is subdue, dominate. It's an agricultural framework, right? It's to till and to keep is the next phrase in the next chapter in Genesis. But when you use the word gift, you get the impression that, hey, I made this for you. And that's not it. And the beauty is not for us. We say, we hear that all the time, but, and it's true actually to say the glory of, the heavens declare the glory of God and the firmament proclaims his handiwork, right? It's right to say that. That's a different statement than the reason the heavens are beautiful is so that you humans see the beauty of God. That's not what's being said. And so it's that kind of subtle but devastating twist that I push against. Does that make sense?
Great. I think that goes back to white privilege in a lot of ways, that indigenous people have more love and respect for nature, and it's more part of their DNA and the way they live and think, the way they live and move and have their being, than a lot of us. So.
Yeah. Lynn and Greg, you've had a hand up there?
Well, I think Jerry's did a wonderful job of opening up my mind anyway, in terms of seeing creation's place in liturgy, just through the examples that you gave of how it could be included and should be included. I certainly have this sense of the way that you have compared the Black Lives Matter movement to what the possibilities could be, into a movement towards reconciling with creation. And I think it begins with where you began the program of human entitlement, the sense that we tend to look down on nature, creation, control it, exclude it, try and overpower it. And we haven't realized that we, as you've said, we are part of this, and we have to include it. And, it begins, at least within the church, probably including it within liturgy. Ultimately, the religion is about relationship. And if I think the truth of what we're trying to understand today is seeing what we've done to creation. And once we understand that, once we've educated ourselves in what we've done, then we can begin to understand how we can reconcile ourselves to creation, and which is just reconciling ourselves to God. It's and so then through that relationship, creation becomes part of, as you said, part of salvation, part of reconciliation. And we have a new sense of forgiveness. And we can begin to live a new life, which is what you said. This is a new way of living by having a deeper relationship with creation.
Yeah, thank you. Well said, I think. And I would also say we need to look around and not just look at what damage we're doing to creation. It's done damage to we ourselves. We are diminished in our diminishing. And then we're with them, not just for them. We need reconciliation. We need healing, as does other parts of the web of life. Right. Still got a few minutes. So let me ask a couple. What about the word marginalization as an awareness? Does that work for you? Say, I see that. I see where we've done that. I see where we're still doing that, or not. Or does it not make any sense at all? You can say that. There, Kim's waving over there, and then Joey, we'll get to you.
Yeah, I guess marginalization, I can see the sense of that in lots of the other areas. In terms of creation, to me, it's more of seeing it as something outside of ourselves. We call it the environment, as if it's out there. And I had a ministry for many years within the Lutheran Church of earthkeeping, I called it. So I would, as a deacon, a diaconal minister, I would try to equip and empower others to be about earthkeeping. And initially, early on, like the 1990s, I'd spoken of it as environmental stewardship. And then I realized after a while that was not appropriate, because it's not just out there, and it's not just us taking care of it, it's us realizing we're a part of it all. I think too of one of the teachings of Hildegard of Bingen, the phrase she developed called viriditas, which means like greening power. It's like the more deeply you are connected to Christ, the greener you are. So I would use it in a way of talking about greening our spirits, greening our world. As we deepen and green our own spirits, then we cannot ignore the pain of creation or injustice to others, whether it's creation or other people. So we become a part of greening the world. And as we heal the world, it heals us.
Yes, thank you. I should write this stuff down.
Email me later if you want.
So Joey and then Michael.
I always go back to Martin Buber and the I, thou, I, it relationships. And I think for me, that's at the heart of why we marginalize people or animals or property or anything else. If I can somehow, and living in an icon for 14 months with you guys gave me this sense, if I can get a sense that everything that God created is of God and it is sacred, and begin to see that, then I'm not going to marginalize the earth. I'm not going to marginalize my brothers and my sisters. And I'm not going to, I am going to be, my favorite line is one with God, one with my neighbor, human neighbors, and one with all of creation. So I look at that marginalization, Jerry, as my relationship with anything other than me. And do I see it as sacred, being of God, or do I see it as a thing? That's all.
Thank you.
I find sometimes very, very sad. I had two experiences since I've been here. One is I saw the the mobile beehives. I went to a place there was no bee to pollinate the crops. So they have to transport bees from one area to the other area. So the technology of mass production of food, the same time is destroying the soil, the other creatures, insects. So I don't know where we are heading, but if we have to do the mobiling of the bees to pollinate our crops, if we fail to do that, I don't know if we're going to have any food in the future, because the pesticide kills all the insects in a forest. That's one. Two, do we share any information with our children, our grandchildren? Where do we get milk? Where do we get bread? Where do we get corn? Do they know that they are coming in a field, in the soil, in our environment, or they just find them in a grocery stores, in a supermarket? Where do they find it? How do we link them with the creation? How do we link our children, our grandchildren with the creation? Because the economic systems don't want us to know that, because we will stand and tell them, no, you are destroying our environment. So they created this kind of an island. We don't know anything about our environment because they want us to focus on grocery stores, focus in the supermarket, don't go beyond that. So I don't know how to break this chain, but we are.
Part of that one place to start breaking this chain is in the words of our faith communities. In other words, because it takes something deeper than just attacking, oh, I don't know, what do you say, attacking the, I don't know, to focus on the supermarket. We got to have our own foundational resources intact for this work. I guess that's what I'm really trying to get at. And I think you're exactly right. The resistance that will make this, I would declare, harder than it has been for race and gender. This is harder. The economic implications are bigger. The lifestyle implications are bigger. And the demon of the economy, or the demon, that's not really the way to say it. The demon of an exploited, an economy based on extraction and exploitation, will fight tooth and nail. And that's actually also what lies behind, an economic status quo is what lies behind racial change, the resistance to change of any kind. Those who benefit from a certain economic status quo will fight, and this will create a fight. If you make creation holy, then its desecration is a desecration. It is a sacrilege, and that becomes then a real problem for how we run this economy. So, anyways.
There's been some discussion in the chat about panentheism. Do you want to talk about that any, Jerry?
If we can keep it from being a distraction, there is this fear, of course. The way I kind of would say it is those powers that benefit from the status quo, who don't want to talk about the truth of of their own exploitation and their benefit from it, will do anything to deflect from that truth telling. And the accusation of pantheism is one of those things, in an attempt to keep us away from the challenge of this kind of truth telling. They will say, oh, you can't do that because it's pantheism. Now that's maybe a practical application of it. Panentheism is a word I see in the chat, which
That's
makes
what I
more
was referring to.
sense, right? Which is basically God infused the presence of God in all things. And I think rightly held, that's exactly right. The Holy Spirit infuses all things. And God's, there's a lot of great, Robin, you can do this, the creation story, the idea that God is given God's self into creation. That's where it came from. Where do you think it came from if it didn't come from God? If it came from someplace else, then God's not God. And so it's by almost necessary definition that all things are infused with the body of God, if you want to put it that way, or the Spirit of God, if you want to put it that way. I don't know what else to do with pantheism other than we could work with it to keep it from being a fearful deflection from the hard work of actually becoming Christian, I guess.
It looks like Anne has a question or comment.
Yeah, thank you. I guess when we talk about exploitation and the powers that be and the economics of exploiting the natural world as it is, I mean, I think it's really important that, we just acknowledge that every single one of us here is being exploited by these systems. And it's not just, it's not just, it's creation inclusive. I mean, we do not live in a society that values health. We live in a society that values maybe medicine. We don't live in a society that values, really strong nutrition and I mean, any of these things that would really glorify God, so.
I agree. I think that's well said. And that also lies behind the other struggles. And medicine, I guess I'd even say, we're a society that values profitable medicine.
Yeah, you got it.
Say it that way. Also, Elizabeth said, presence of God in all things, but God remains transcendent beyond all things. And I think to be right thinking, we have to be able to say both of those things without resolving them, as is the Trinity and everything else. If we think we can resolve it, then we've made God too small, and so on. So, okay, where else? What else? I have a set. Almost 20 till. I think we put these at 1 hour and 15. I think we run out of gas at about an hour, and then it takes us 15 minutes to coast.
Jerry, I guess I'll just add an economic perspective here, and we'll see if we go further than that. If not, well, we can peter out for the evening here. We talk about institutionalized sin. It's one of the phrases we tend to use in church language. Economists talk about technological lock-in, in that we are embedded in a technological system that we may not like, but nevertheless, if I'm living 6 miles outside of Swanee, if I want to get into Swanee, I have to drive. I can't take mass transit. If I try to ride my bicycle, I'll get run over, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Why did I move out here? Of course, why do people move out of the cities? And we're embedded in a whole system that may not embody the values that we would like to espouse or that we espouse, but we don't find ways that we can live in a way that is consonant with our values. And so we are locked into systems that constrain our behavior, just like institutionalized sin or systemic racism. It's all this notion that we're embodied in systems that may be in some way sinful or immoral or deleterious to life. And so this is that whole work of, first of all, having a vision of where we could go, and then praying and asking for discernment from the Holy Spirit as to, if this is the vision, what's the first step I can take to move towards that vision? We may not know the whole strategy, but if we truly believe in a God that's active, then we have to believe that the Holy Spirit cares more about this than we do, and that if we ask, we'll be guided. And if we all do that, well, then change comes. So I think that's a difference I think what the faith community can bring to this, saying that the solution is bigger than we are, just like the problem is bigger than we are. And so we need to pray and discern. It's so tempting to go out and do this and do that and frantically try to save the world, as opposed to asking God, what would you have me do to save your world? And there's a difference in stance there. So I guess if we're going to change something that we're locked into, we need help.
Or we give up on the idea of change completely and just say, what's right? And a lot of this stuff is just simply being right.
Mm-hmm.
Being right for its own sake. And this is a conversation we're going to have about despair and depression and grief, which I guess we'll tap into next month. But you know, what's the spiritual resources for abiding in truth with that, even in the midst of failure and collapse, I guess, and
right,
you know, so yep. All right, we can call that done.
I think we've done good.
It's good to see y'all. Yeah, we're back. Yay.
Jerry,
Yes.
at least we'll be in it together.
You know, and that, I think that's no small statement. I mean, I think that's kind of right. I mean, better to, you know, if we're all gonna live in a world of wounds, and we're not changing that, then better to do that together, and to do it righteously, and to do it in right kinship. Why choose something cheap and shallow and broken when you can choose something good and right and whole? Just because the rest of the world's going to screw it up doesn't mean we would stop being good and right and whole. But anyways, all right. Thanks, everyone. Blessings on you all. We shall see you again, I hope, in not too long. And Robin, other words?
No, just thanks everybody for coming tonight. Blessings. May the Lord continue to guide our steps. And have a good night.
Good night.
Good
Night,
night.
everyone.
Thank
Peace.
you.
Bye.
Started at 30, right?
Yes, well, folks. Okay.